What about settlements? What kind of strategy should you bring to those?
You should always be thinking when you go into a settlement about trying to keep the power, assuming that, of course, you are the party who is settling a claim, and you are going to be receiving something, usually money, of course, on the settlement. Now, you can just agree to settle the claim. So claim is settled, X will pay Y a sum of money. I think that Y in that scenario can do a bit better than that, and that the settlement should be made conditional on the payment. And that applies whether it's a lump sum payment or an instalment payment. If it's an instalment payment and the settlement is not conditional, of course you've foregone your claim by doing the settlement, and if the first instalment isn't paid, the only thing that is outstanding at that point is the first instalment. That is now all you can sue for. So you have swapped what is potentially quite a large claim for a small instalment claim, and that can be not great. So I think that you always ought to keep the power, as I say, by making settlements conditional. So if the settlement is conditional on the payments being made, then of course if the other side do want to miss or be late on a payment, then the threat to them is that the whole settlement falls away and you go back to the claim that you had in the first place. And that claim that you had in the first place is the thing that was sufficiently scary for them that made them settle with you, when they settled by doing the settlement. So I think it is worth keeping the power, making a settlement conditional. I think that's always worth bearing in mind and thinking about it and making sure that if you don't do it, you do it for a good reason. And there a good reason, of course, is, and not that any of us have ever done this, but were you to find yourselves running a slightly dodgy claim that you thought was a bit spurious in places or perhaps slightly inflated, and you were able to get a settlement of that, so you settled a £5 million claim for £500,000, you'd be much happier with a clear contractual right to this £500,000, and the last thing that you want is to see them default and have to go back to the rather dodgy £5 million claim. So there you wouldn't make it conditional, but it's important to go through the thought process and make sure that you have come to a proper view on it.
What about if there are multi-parties to the claim?
Now, multi-parties to a claim and settlement is one area that is always dangerous and requires some thought. It is somewhere where I do think actually parties should always be thinking about involving external counsel, because it can be a trap for the unwary. And indeed it was in the recent Gladman case where they had 4 potential defendants, sued 2 of them, settled, and then tried to sue the other 2, and the court said that could not happen. They had settled the claim. And that is the issue here with multi-defendants. When you do the settlement, you might think that you, the claimant, are just settling with defendant number 1, but you're not. What you're doing is, of course, you are settling the legal claim that you have, of which one defendant is this one here, defendant 1. But when you settle the claim, that takes out defendant 2, defendant 3, defendant 4. It takes out the claim. It doesn't just take them out defendant by defendant. So you need to think about how to manage that. And the classic way of doing that is by not doing a full and final settlement, but by doing a no-sue agreement. So if you, defendant 1, pay me X, I will no longer sue you. I won't sue you, or I won't carry on the claim against you. I won't seek judgment against you. And again, in the Gladman case, the courts were very keen that the parties were open about what they were doing there. And if you were doing a not sue, you had to be clear that that's what you were doing, a not sue. Now, why wouldn't you just do a not sue, therefore? Because it comes with the following risk. That risk is, of course, that a well-advised defendant will see what you're doing and will know that the reason you're doing it is because you're about to go after his defendants 2, 3 and 4. His co-defendants, in other words, or his potential co-defendants. And as soon as you do that, he having just tried to settle with you, what will actually happen is that they will then sue him for a contribution. So there is a real risk that a well-advised defendant number 1 wouldn't do a no-sue agreement. He really is only in it for a settlement. But the courts are saying, look, if you offer defendant 1 a full and final settlement, you have to do it with your eyes open. It's the risk you're taking about the whole claim. Okay, so be open about what you're doing. And that, therefore, is a difficult balance as to how to phrase and get through your settlement with one only of multi-party defendants. And it's always a tricky area.
Finally, give me a couple of points on what an in-house lawyer needs to be thinking about before deciding to fight.
The risk in litigation from a legal perspective, as in what will the substantive outcome be, is changing and becoming less certain, therefore more risky, because of these common themes over the last dozen years or so around just so much more law. So very easy to, or much easier than it ever was previously, to find a case for and a case against nearly every argument that you're having in court. And also around purposive interpretation of contracts. So whereas 20 years ago we might have read a clause and just said that means X, so it's X, actually now it is easier to run a case and say it might look like it means X, but in the context of this contract it means something else. So there is just more substantive risk in litigation because of the substantive law. And now going the other way, not because things have loosened up, but because things have tightened up, this procedural change that Jackson has introduced about much more rigidity around court timelines at this moment in time creates a bit more risk as well, just because it's a very significant change from what we had a year ago. A year ago, everybody was friends, everybody granted more time if they were asked to, everybody had more time if they needed it. The issue was just about getting the case to trial in a just way to allow the court to do justice between the parties. That has changed now, and the courts are considering not just justice between the parties, but actually proportionate cost. So the courts will make what look like harsh decisions just because in the whole scheme of civil litigation in the courts generally, it's the right order to make, irrespective of the fact that it might be hard luck between the parties. So that is worth thinking about always for in-house counsel before they start on a piece of litigation. But of course, if you do decide to go ahead with it, what does it mean? These recent Jackson changes, well, they change the procedure, and you just need to change your behaviour and make sure that you hit the deadline. So that is now very important, and you just got to start making diary flags that things need to happen and make sure they happen. That's what the new rules are saying. And if you can do that and you can be rigorous about it and you hit all of your timelines, that will of course put more pressure on the other party, because if they miss one, it's them who's going to be in trouble. The courts still look at mediations and settlement, and that does mean that you can still start litigation hoping that you will be able to use it as a tool to get you to a negotiated, settled, amicable settlement outcome. But so long as you always go into it as well knowing that it may be that the other side will just be very aggressive about matters and you may end up at a trial. But as long as you are thinking about those things when you start the litigation at the outset, just keep those in mind. You can come to a reasoned decision as to what is right for this particular dispute or issue that has arisen.